For my next guest to defend her title, please welcome UFC Women's Champion, Ronda Rousey.
Sonya Blade is, she's a defender of Earthrealm in Mortal Kombat.
I can eat at the rate of melting, you know? I want to eat at my own rate.
Because Dana and Lorenzo wanted to do something nice for the ladies. Product placement, everything.
She was brash, unapologetic, and seemingly unstoppable. At her peak, she was more than just a fighter. She was a cultural phenomenon, a household name who dragged an entire sport into the mainstream spotlight. Ronda Rousey wasn't simply another champion. She was the face of women's mixed martial arts, a pioneer who made the impossible possible. But behind the highlight reels and magazine covers was a story filled with triumph, struggle, and the haunting truth that even the most dominant figures can fall from the top faster than anyone ever imagined. To understand the rise of Ronda Rousey, we have to rewind back to the beginning. Born in Riverside, California in 1987, she entered the world with complications. As an infant, Ronda struggled with apraxia of speech, a neurological condition that made forming words difficult. For the first years of her life, she couldn't speak clearly, often feeling isolated and misunderstood. But that same frustration that weighed her down as a child later fueled her relentless drive. She grew up tough, stubborn, and unwilling to be defined by limitations. Her mother, Anne Maria de Mars, was no ordinary parent. She herself was a pioneer in martial arts, the first American to win a World Judo Championship in 1984. Anne Maria raised her daughter with discipline, resilience, and a ferocious belief that strength was not optional. It was survival. Their household wasn't like others. While many kids were told to take up hobbies, Ronda was being drilled in the art of throws, grips, and submissions before she was even a teenager. Her childhood wasn't sugar-coated. It was molded by hardship. When Ronda was just 8 years old, her father committed suicide after suffering from chronic back injuries. It was a devastating blow that left permanent scars on her, but it also hardened her resolve. Loss would become a recurring theme in her life, and the way she responded to it would define her legacy. By her teenage years, Ronda was already carving a name in the world of judo. She was ferocious, unrelenting, and talented. At only 17, she qualified for the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, making her the youngest judoka there. She didn't medal, but the experience lit a fire inside her. She knew she belonged on the biggest stages, and she wasn't going to settle until she proved it. 4 years later, in Beijing, she made history. Ronda Rousey won the bronze medal in judo, becoming the first American woman ever to stand on the Olympic podium in the sport. It was validation, but it was also the beginning of an identity crisis. After dedicating her entire youth to judo, she suddenly found herself at the end of the road with nowhere else to go. Post-Olympics life was not glamorous. Unlike boxers or basketball players, judokas didn't transition into millionaires after winning medals. Ronda struggled financially, living out of her car at times, working odd jobs as a bartender and a veterinary assistant just to get by. She had tasted glory, but now reality was crushing. She needed a new path. That path appeared in the form of mixed martial arts. Women's MMA wasn't even close to mainstream acceptance at the time. The UFC had no female divisions. The sport was seen as brutal, niche, and mostly male-dominated. But Ronda didn't see limits. With her judo background and her ability to transition seamlessly into arm bars, she became a nightmare opponent for anyone standing across from her. From the moment she stepped into the cage, it was clear she wasn't like the others. She wasn't there to take part. She was there to dominate. Her early fights were short, vicious, and unforgettable. Ronda had a signature move that became her trademark. the armbar. Opponents knew it was coming, but they couldn't stop it. She ripped through her competition in under a minute, again and again, almost making it look unfair. Within months, she went from an unknown Olympian to the most feared woman in MMA. Her arrival coincided with the efforts of Strikeforce, a promotion willing to take risks on female fighters when the UFC refused. It was there that Ronda started gaining attention, demolishing anyone who stood in her way. And when she won the Strikeforce Women's Bantamweight Championship in 2012, Dana White could no longer deny the obvious. The UFC, which had once boldly declared that women would never fight inside its octagon, signed Ronda Rousey as its very first female fighter. She wasn't just given a contract, she was handed a belt and crowned the inaugural women's bantamweight champion before even setting foot inside a UFC cage. That decision was controversial, but it paid off almost immediately. Her UFC debut against Liz Carmouche in 2013 was a watershed moment. For the first time in history, a UFC event was headlined by women. The stakes were enormous, and the scrutiny was relentless. Ronda was tested early in the fight when Carmouche nearly locked in a choke, but in true Rousey fashion, she escaped and finished the fight with her signature armbar in the very first round. The crowd erupted, and history had been made. Women's MMA was here, and it was here to stay. From that moment on, Ronda Rousey became a star unlike anything the UFC had ever seen. Her fights weren't just contests, they were spectacles. She carried herself with the arrogance of a prize fighter, walking into press conferences with sunglasses on, spitting out bold predictions, and then backing them up with devastating performances. She wasn't afraid to talk trash, but more importantly, she wasn't afraid to finish fights in style. Her reign was brutal and efficient. She dispatched Miesha Tate, Kat Zingano, Sarah McMahon, Alexis Davis, and Beth Correa, often in under a minute. Fans didn't even have time to settle into their seats before Ronda was already standing with her arm raised. The aura of invincibility grew with each victory. The UFC marketed her as Rowdy Ronda Rousey, a nickname borrowed with blessing from pro wrestling legend Roddy Piper. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a brand. Hollywood came calling. She appeared in blockbuster movies like The Expendables 3, Furious 7, and Entourage. She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, featured in ESPN's Body issue, and named the most dominant athlete alive by magazines. At her peak, she was being compared to icons like Mike Tyson. Just like Tyson, fans tuned in to see her win or lose, knowing either outcome would be spectacular. She wasn't only drawing MMA fans, she was pulling in casual viewers, celebrities, and mainstream media who had never cared about the sport before. She was a one-woman revolution. But as history has shown us, the higher the rise, the harder the fall. Ronda's dominance created sky-high expectations. She was unbeatable. Or so everyone thought. With each win, the mystique grew. But so did the pressure. The UFC leaned heavily on her star power, building entire pay-per-views around her, sometimes at the expense of other fighters. She became both the face of women's MMA and its biggest target. What no one knew then was that behind the bravado, behind the quick finishes, and the magazine covers, Ronda Rousey was carrying enormous weight. The weight of expectation, the pressure of being the pioneer, and the burden of never being allowed to lose. By 2015, she was at her absolute peak. Her fight against Beth Correa in Brazil ended in just 34 seconds. Her win over Kat Zingano, 14 seconds. The UFC was billing her as unbeatable, unstoppable, a once-in-a-lifetime athlete. Even mainstream outlets began speculating that she could beat men, that she was invincible. But invincibility is an illusion, and illusions have a way of shattering in an instant. That shattering moment was coming, but for now, Ronda Rousey was on top of the world. A young woman who had once lived in her car after the Olympics was now one of the biggest stars in sports, commanding millions of dollars, commanding the respect of Hollywood, and commanding fear in the hearts of her opponents. Her rise was meteoric, historic, and unlike anything MMA had ever seen before. But what happens when the world finally sees the hero fall? The illusion of invincibility can last a long time, but eventually reality finds its way through. For Ronda Rousey, that reality arrived on November 14, 2015, in Melbourne, Australia. She stepped into the octagon to defend her bantamweight title against Holly Holm, a decorated boxer and kickboxer who is seen by many as a massive underdog. The crowd was enormous, over 50,000 people, the largest in UFC history at the time. The atmosphere was electric, the expectation almost suffocating. This was supposed to be just another Ronda Rousey showcase, another highlight reel finish, another quick reminder that she was untouchable. But instead, it became the night everything changed. From the opening bell, something felt different. Holm wasn't intimidated. She didn't rush, didn't panic, and didn't give Ronda the openings that so many others had. Instead, she circled, kept her distance, and used her footwork to stay clear of Ronda's aggressive charges. Rousey, usually the hunter, suddenly looked like she was chasing shadows. Her punches were wild, her takedowns sloppy. Holm was cool, calculated, and precise. The crowd began to sense it. For the first time, Ronda looked vulnerable. Then came the moment that is etched into MMA history forever. Early in the second round, Holm landed a clean left head kick that connected flush. Ronda crumpled to the mat, unconscious. Her reign as champion shattered in an instant. The silence that followed was almost as deafening as the cheers. The unbeatable Ronda Rousey had been beaten. Not just beaten, but dismantled in a way that exposed every flaw she had hidden behind years of dominance. The fallout was brutal. Overnight, the narrative flipped. Critics who had once praised her as unstoppable now dissected her weaknesses. Pundits who had declared her the most dominant athlete in the world now asked if she had ever been truly great to begin with. The media frenzy was relentless. Photos of her, knocked out face down on the canvas, were plastered everywhere. Memes flooded the internet. For someone who had built her persona on dominance and intimidation, the humiliation cut deep. But what made the Holm loss even more devastating was how Ronda handled it. Instead of facing the cameras and owning the defeat, she vanished. She disappeared from the public eye for months, spiraling into depression. In a rare interview months later, she admitted that the loss had been so crushing she had contemplated suicide. The invincible champion had crumbled not just physically, but mentally. She was human, painfully so. When she finally returned more than a year later, it was against Amanda Nunes, another ferocious striker who was quietly building her own legacy. The UFC hyped it as a redemption story, another chance for Ronda to reclaim her throne. But deep down, many suspected the magic was gone. On December 30th, 2016, she walked into the octagon again, the spotlight just as bright, the expectations just as heavy. Yet, within 48 seconds, it was over. Nunes unleashed a savage barrage of punches, and Ronda had no answers. She was rocked, battered, and ultimately saved by the referee. Just like that, her fighting career was effectively finished. The back-to-back losses were shocking, not just because of how quickly they happened, but because of how thoroughly they exposed the limits of Ronda's game. The armbar queen, the judo specialist who had torn through opponents, suddenly looked one-dimensional. She had never developed the striking skills necessary to evolve with the sport. And when her aura of invincibility vanished, opponents were no longer afraid. The mystique was gone, and so was the reign. Ronda never fought in MMA again. She left the sport without so much as a goodbye press conference. There was no retirement tour, no farewell fight, no moment of closure. For fans, it felt abrupt, unfinished. For Ronda, it was too painful to confront. The fighter who once carried women's MMA on her shoulders simply walked away, leaving a legacy that was both groundbreaking and complicated. But Ronda Rousey was not done with fame. Hollywood had already embraced her, and the world of professional wrestling was waiting. In 2018, she shocked the sports world by signing with WWE. At first, many scoffed, calling it a desperate move, a step down from real fighting. But when she made her debut at WrestleMania 34, the response was thunderous. Ronda wasn't just dabbling in wrestling, she was fully committed. Her athleticism, her intensity, and her larger-than-life persona translated perfectly to the scripted world of sports entertainment. For 2 years, she thrived in WWE. She headlined events, captured the Raw Women's Championship, and once again became a mainstream star. Her presence brought new eyes to women's wrestling, much like she had done in MMA. But even there, controversy followed. She clashed with fans, sometimes lashing out on social media, blurring the line between character and reality. And by 2020, she stepped away from wrestling as suddenly as she had entered, citing the need to focus on her family. Beyond the spotlight, Ronda settled into a quieter life. She married fellow fighter Travis Brown, and in 2021 she gave birth to her daughter. Motherhood softened her in ways that fighting never could. She spoke openly about finding peace away from the cage, about no longer needing to prove herself to the world. For the first time in years, Ronda seemed content, and yet her legacy remains a lightning rod. Ask some fans, and they'll tell you she's the pioneer who made women's MMA possible. Without Ronda, there would be no Amanda Nunes, no Valentina Shevchenko, no sold-out arenas headlined by female fighters. She forced Dana White to change his mind, forced the UFC to open its doors, and proved that women could be the stars of the show. That can never be taken away from her. Ask others, and they'll point to her flaws. Her arrogance, her inability to handle defeat with grace, her quick exit from the sport after back-to-back losses. They'll say she was a front-runner, dominant when ahead, broken when behind. They'll argue that her game never evolved, that her reign was built on intimidation rather than adaptation. To them, Ronda Rousey will always be a cautionary tale. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Ronda Rousey was both a pioneer and a flawed champion. She was both an unstoppable force and a vulnerable human being. She was the reason women's MMA exploded into the mainstream, and she was also proof that no one, no matter how dominant, can escape the evolution of a sport. Her story is a reminder that greatness isn't always about perfection. Sometimes, greatness is about being the first, about blazing a trail others can follow, even if you stumble along the way. Ronda stumbled, fell, and in many ways, never recovered inside the octagon. But the path she carved remains, walked by every female fighter who has headlined a card, earned a paycheck, or inspired the next generation. Today, Ronda lives a quieter life on her farm, raising her family, occasionally appearing in WWE or on television, but far removed from the chaos of her UFC prime. She doesn't need the spotlight anymore. She had it, she conquered it, and she paid the price for it. Whether loved or hated, admired or criticized, Ronda Rousey's name will forever be etched into the history of combat sports. She was the first woman signed by the UFC. She was the first female champion. She was the one who made Dana White eat his words when he swore women would never fight in the octagon. And for a brief, unforgettable time, she was the most dominant athlete alive. The rise, the fall, the reinvention. Ronda Rousey's story is one of the most compelling in all of sports. It is a story of power, pain, and resilience. And while her legacy will always be debated, one truth is undeniable. She changed the game forever. And now, we turn to you. What do you think of Ronda Rousey's legacy? Was she the greatest pioneer in women's MMA, or a fighter who crumbled when the pressure finally caught up? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the story of a legend, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next exploration into the triumphs and tragedies of combat sports.